Hey everybody. If you haven't already, I suggest you watch my last Facebook Live, the one about the pillars of the system in terms of doctors and lawyers and teachers and accountants and so forth. Because that would give some good context to what I'm going to say now. And the question is, I saw someone made a comment. They shared my video from last night and made some comments when they made the post about how they agreed with what I was saying, but they were also looking at the point of how do you they were most concerned about challenging the system because they didn't know how to solve the problem of education and also survival, which is basically your problem of work. So I want to explain to you how you can solve both in one fell swoop while also standing up to the system. Because again, if you're a doctor or you're a lawyer, think about this for a second. You don't really have to develop that much as a human being if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you're an accountant, whatever. If you're a teacher even, you don't really have to develop that much as a human being because you have a place, a position that's supported by the system. So in other words, if you're a doctor, as long as you follow what you're told that the system says is what a doctor should say and what a doctor should do, as long as you follow that, you will make plenty of money to survive and more. Same thing as a lawyer, same thing as an accountant, same thing as a teacher. I mean, it's not a very good living, but you could be a professor, for example. Point is, if you follow along the system, you'll be able to make whatever that average income is at least. So just by taking a position in the system, doctor, lawyer, accountant, teacher, whatever, and following that system, you will be able to survive, and you will not have to develop that much as a human being because you won't need anything other than the vocabulary of that particular profession. So that's why when you look around and you look at doctors and you look at lawyers and you look at other professionals, they don't really have that many, they're not really that developed, that evolved as people. You don't even have to be a good person. All you have to do is follow that system, which is really just acquiring a certain set of vocabulary. So maybe that's not what you want to do. Maybe you don't just want to be another little cog in the system. Maybe you don't just want to be another pillar in the system. Maybe you actually want to stand up to the system because you realize that the system is not best for all. That you realize that the system that we all participate in is systematically creating poverty on a massive scale, on a daily basis, on a moment-to-moment basis. Mass poverty, mass suffering, war, all kinds of things. Because of the way that the system is set up, the economic system, etc., is set up. So let's say you want to stand up to that. The first problem you're going to run into is you can't make money because there's no support for people like that. You have to be very strong and you have to be well developed because if you look at people like doctors, for example, who stand up to the medical industry and try to do their own thing, they can't just go work at a hospital. They have to then basically become entrepreneurs and start their own practices, and they have to find very clever ways to get around being able to say things that are not allowed, and creating private societies, and there's all kinds of things they have to do. So you have to become much more effective, much more well-rounded, much more effective in your ability to communicate, because you can't just stand up with your doctorate degree and say the things that a doctor is told to say and get support from the system and make money. So the moment you try to challenge the system, you now better develop more effective skills, and you better be a part of a group, because if you're not, you're kind of screwed. So how do you both stand up in the system and survive? And this woman who was commenting on the video of mine that she shared was saying that she was still concerned about the problem of how do you educate and how do you work if you're standing up to the system. and you're not just going along with what you're told. It's very simple. You become a TechnoTutor distributor. Because TechnoTutor, the technology, solves the problem of education in this world in a way that not only allows you to become a more developed, well-rounded, more evolved, more effective human being, but so in other words, you can survive effectively, but it also does it in a way where you're then able to see through and speak truth and speak honestly about how things actually work, because you can actually see it and understand it, because you can process information at a higher level. You can actually process information. What everyone else is doing, who's a product of the education system that already exists, is just memorizing information and repeating it. That's not processing information. That's just repeating information that you've memorized. That's just basically reading a book. That's not you understanding anything. That's just you reading words off of a page that you didn't write and that you don't really understand. The difference with what TechnoTutor does is it supports you to actually develop an effective ability to look at reality directly, process it, which means understand and connect all the dots of what you're seeing, and then be able to speak about it effectively and communicate it with other people, and then also understand it so that if you see a problem, you can actually solve it. Because when you look at doctors, as an example, they typically don't solve real problems. Now, with the exception of people like surgeons, you know, you might have, like, if you have a broken leg and you need to heal your broken leg and put a cast on and stuff, that's an appropriate example. But if you have diabetes and someone's just giving you some kind of solution that's not actually solving the problem, but it's just suppressing a symptom, when there is an ability to actually solve the problem, that's not effective. That is not actually looking at the problem and solving it. That's just repeating a solution that you're told to without really questioning it. This is one example. So how does TechnoTutor fit into this? Because if you understand how TechnoTutor works, and you understand that it allows a person to actually learn information and learn vocabulary in a way where they can process reality, they can understand what's going on, so that they can actually face problems head on and solve them for real. Because your ability to understand the information is in the context of how things actually work, because you can see how things work, and you can see what won't work. And so you can see how continuing to put Band-Aids on something doesn't solve the problem. It just allows you to sell more Band-Aids. That's all it does. That's not a real solution, because what happens is, because you don't solve the problem will get worse. Because let's say the problem is, hypothetically, food is being injected with chemicals, and that's what's making us sick, as one example. Well, if the people who are injecting with chemicals because they know it makes the food more tasty and therefore more attractive to a person's palate, know that on the other side of things, doctors are prescribing drugs that cover up the pain associated with the experience of ingesting these chemicals and the long-term consequences of it, then they know that they can just keep injecting more and more chemicals, which would make you more and more addictive to the food, because on the other side, they just create newer and newer drugs that help you manage the pain more effectively. So the problem just compounds more and more and more, but it's going to compound to a point where it's not going to be manageable anymore. And that would get to a point where the consequence is so great, there's nothing we can do about it, and we could cause an irreparable harm to ourselves and to our children. We don't want our children to grow up into an environment where they can't even survive anymore, because we've destroyed all of the natural crops that were put here on the earth, and the drinking water is totally destroyed, and the air quality is totally destroyed. We don't want that. We want to actually create a world where our children have a better place than what we had, not worse. But the only way to do that is to be realistic and to be honest with ourselves about the problems that actually exist in this world. Because if we're not, we just compound problems. So how do you do that? Well, you have to be able to actually see what's going on. You can't be manipulated by words. If someone's able to use words in an emotional way that triggers you and causes you to either not look at something or to focus on it incorrectly to not solve the problem because you're triggered emotionally. And therefore, for example, let's say you see a problem and someone says to you, well, you're sexist or you're racist for bringing up this problem. When you're really just genuinely seeing an actual problem that exists that should be addressed. And if it's addressed, it would actually support everybody, regardless of your sex or race or whatever. It would actually be best for all to solve the problem. If someone can say to you, oh, you shouldn't even focus on that problem or talk about it because you're racist or sexist, and that triggers you emotionally, and therefore you don't actually focus on and solve the problem, but then the problem just compounds and harms everybody in the long run, that's a problem. So you have to be able to see when someone's using words in a manipulative way, because maybe they benefit in some way from that problem continuing to exist. And so you have to be able to use discernment. And discernment is a direct consequence of having an effective vocabulary, because discernment is simply the ability to see what things really are and to see when you're being lied to and when you're being emotionally manipulated versus when you're being told the truth. Because if you can see reality directly, then no one can ever hide anything from you, because you can just see it for yourself. But if you lack an effective vocabulary, then you will lack the ability to discern effectively, and you're more easily manipulated. And why is TechnoTutor such a critical tool in this process? Because when you're developing your vocabulary from a young age, if it's not done in a systematic way and it's not structured effectively, piece by piece by piece by piece, letter by letter, word by word, brick by brick, if it's not structured effectively in your brain and in your body, then your body won't process information effectively. And so what will happen is, instead of you processing the information as it is and seeing the clear result and seeing how the result of your thinking process, how it would actually play out in reality if you were to design something based on your thinking process, if that's not done effectively 100%, but it's done based on emotions or based on opinions, then the result of the thing that you create as a solution to a problem will have unintended negative side effects or consequences that would then harm other people or animals or plants or you or future generations to come, because you didn't consider all of the points effectively, because you can't, because it's not about your conscious thought process. It's about how you process information at an unconscious level. Just like a computer. The computer processes information unconsciously. It's not aware of the information consciously. It has a physical circuitry, and that processes the information in the computer automatically, unconsciously. And our body's actually designed exactly the same way. Whenever you're thinking, that's actually a result that's being produced after the fact, after the information has already been processed through your unconscious programming processes. So when you're thinking about things, that is a result. So if your thinking is producing ineffective solutions, that means it's not the problem of how you should think about it consciously. The problem is your unconscious programming is not programmed effectively. So that's why you're not thinking correctly. So the way you change that is not through the conscious thought process, it's through changing the unconscious part, the programming, what we call your resonance. Your resonance is the sum total of all of your programming, which is represented symbolically through letters and numbers. That's the programming of a human being, just like a computer has zeros and ones, and they're physically represented in switches. We have things called neurons. Our cells, the cells of our body, store information, but it does it as words, just like a computer does it with ones and zeros. Problem is, after you have developed a certain level of vocabulary, especially if it's not effective, then your mind becomes this storm of chaos, because it's no longer producing information that's harmonious, it's producing noise. And so what happens is, when you look at, for example, a person's brain, there's devices that you can get, they have them in hospitals. They can actually see the electrical activity of a person's brain. So your brain creates this electrical activity on the outer layer of the brain. And the problem is, once that starts occurring, it's very difficult to get new information in there. The new information will only go in if it already is programmed in. So anything new, anything that might challenge what the programming was in your first 7 years of life, can't get through that electrical storm in your brain. Literally, it's like a literal electrical force field. I mean, just look it up, EEGs. That's how it works. So your brain is working at a certain frequency. And if you don't know the right frequency of how to get that information through, then no information will get through. So you can memorize a bunch of information and you can add to this thought process here, but it's not getting through into the part of your brain which would actually direct your body to create new neural pathways. And so we try to do this through spaced repetition process. But a spaced repetition process is extremely slow. And you have to do it exactly right when you're doing it in this spaced repetition process. You have to actually do whatever the thing is you're trying to learn perfectly for you to learn it perfectly. And for you to do it perfectly over and over and over again until finally you create the right amount of stimulus so that you can get through that electrical storm that's going on the surface of your brain into the central processor, which would actually direct your body to make new neural pathways. The amount of effort and focus and energy that's required is so extreme that no one can do it. And that's why most adults, when they're past the age of well, they're not even adults at that point, but when people are past the age of 7, especially when they're adults, they can't learn anymore. And I work with all kinds of people at all ages, and I noticed that you have teenagers in school, for example, because I've worked with many, 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 many teenagers in my career as a tutor, that just simply cannot learn. And no matter what you do as a tutor and try to explain, no matter how you explain it, yeah, sure, they can memorize it for a short period of time, and if that's the goal is just to memorize information, okay. But have you actually helped that person? No, you haven't, because they're not able to then process information any more effectively than they were before. All they've done is just memorize the information that's required to be able to repeat back on their test. That's all that's occurred. You've just helped them add a little bit to that electrical storm, that chaotic situation going on in their brain, the surface of their brain, this thought process. But all that ends up happening is they just have more stuff overloading their brain, and they have to dump it. Because it's like a computer. You only have so much RAM. You only have so much memory that you can hold in your mind at any one given time. And so once you learn something, to memorize a new set of information, you have to dump everything that you had in there previously. And that's why children can't seem to remember anything that they're learning in school after 1 year, or even after 1 semester, or even after they take the test. They just really can't remember anything. So it's like when you're tutoring and you're working with students after, they've had a whole semester of classes and they're taking their final exams, you'll find that it's almost like you're teaching everything all over again. They'll remember some of it, but most of it they don't. And that's a very stressful experience. Think about the stress that's caused when you can't remember something, and then you feel like you're stupid or something's wrong with you, just not realizing that really wasn't taught to you effectively. Because you don't know how to actually put the information in. Just like you don't know how to program a computer. I guarantee you most of you who are watching this do not know how to program a computer from the ground up. So if you didn't know how to do that, imagine you're trying to get this computer to do something it's not programmed to do. And you're just trying to shout at the computer screen or just move things around on the desktop. That's not going to make the computer be able to do something wholly different. Like if you have a desktop computer and you're trying to move stuff around your desktop, that's not going to help the computer learn how to fly a jumbo jet. You'd have to actually go into the program and probably add new hardware or add new programs or new operating systems or things that weren't there before. And that's the problem, is you're trying to take a child who's 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, and you're trying to install a new program called algebra. But their brain doesn't process information effectively. The relationships that are required to really fundamentally understand algebra, for example, those relationships don't exist in the architecture of the person's brain, because in the first 7 years of the child's life, the parent didn't structure the vocabulary of that child's brain to be able to process those relationships. So it's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to process it. And now if you're trying to take this ineffectively structured brain and information processing system and trying to add new software to it, install new software, such as algebra and calculus, the only thing the child can do to cope with the situation is try to memorize. But then what ends up happening is they don't really understand any of it. So if they ever had to apply it, which most of them won't because that's not the purpose of school anyways, but if they ever did have to apply it, they would not be able to. So they just end up memorizing shit. And that's why doctors, a lot of times, they don't even know half the shit they're talking about. They really don't. I've probably read more research articles than the average doctor that you would go see. They don't even have time for it anyways, because they're just busy seeing patients and repeating the stuff that they've heard and prescribing whatever drugs or solutions the pharmaceutical companies tell them to do. And there's a whole industry around that, just marketing to doctors to get them to promote the next new drug. It's a scam. So if you look at TechnoTutor, imagine if we knew the right frequency to be able to get through that electrical storm that's a projection of an ineffective vocabulary, and we knew how to get straight to the part in the brain that can actually direct the creation of new neural pathways. And we could place and structure information in the brain and restructure the brain so that it's more effective because it wasn't done effectively. If you do this from the time a child is very young, you just structure it effectively in the very beginning. You don't ever have to go back and do this, but as an adult, you have to go back and restructure it. So imagine as a tutor, the kind of results you can get with your students. If you had a technology that would allow you, not only you can teach the material, but then you can actually support the student as you're teaching the material to restructure their brain so it is processing relationships in a new way. So they're not just memorizing it, they're actually restructuring their brain according to the new relationships in information that they're learning. And then you can look at how that would support people to understand the world better. Because our brains are not structured effectively due to an ineffective vocabulary, we cannot see what's going on in reality effectively. We cannot understand the relationships between things. We cannot connect the dots because our brains, our bodies do not process the information. It can't. It can't process those relationships because the types of information that we're exposed to from a young age and the way our vocabularies are structured is so limited and ineffective because parents don't know what they're doing. They weren't taught to do it, and that's probably by design. So that you have a dumbed down population that can't really put two and two together, and they can't see what's going on. They can't see that everybody's being scammed into being consumers at the expense of 20,000 children a day who die of starvation. Just so some people can basically live like kings and not have to really do anything. Whereas the rest of us have to go to work every day and basically utilize our precious gift of life, which we get only once, just to survive, to make money so that we can continue breathing and making money. And that money doesn't go to benefit us or the world. It just goes to benefit a few, and it really doesn't even benefit them. All they're doing is trying to protect their own position so they just don't have to have a shitty life by working all day. They can do whatever they want. Can you imagine if you didn't have to work every day, how differently you would experience your life? And you had enough money that you could be healthy all the time. Like anything that came up, you had a solution. You had time. You could spend it however you want because you don't have to go and work and do something you don't want to do. And that's really what TechnoTutor offers people, because not only is it a technology that allows you to, as I said, restructure your vocabulary, restructure the architecture of your brain so that you can actually process information in a new way, in a more effective way. And we support people through that process of doing it. But also, you can become a distributor of the technology, and you can tutor people and support them to reorganize themselves and become more effective so they can see the world more clearly. You use it for yourself, you see the world more clearly, and you make a lot of money doing it if you apply yourself in the business. Right? Of course, there's nothing in this world that if you don't apply yourself, you can make money, unless you're just born into a family where you are able to print money at interest and not have to work for it. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a real opportunity to really work, but do something with your work and your energy that actually improves yourself, improves your community. And by that improvement, it's not just a feel-good improvement, like, oh, I feel like I helped somebody. Like, you actually support another person and another person and another person by tutoring them in a way where they're not just memorizing information, they're actually increasing their ability to see reality and to process it and to communicate with other people and to be realistic about what's going on this earth and to solve problems. And then as parents do this for themselves, they can support their children, or parents-to-be can support their children. And as we do this more and more, we build communities around ourselves where we're supporting that community to actually stand up and take responsibility for our space that we're living here on this earth while we're here, and leave it in a better condition than we found it, and clean up all the problems that are myriad. But once we clean up all those problems, which really wouldn't take that long if we had enough highly effective people focusing on the problems, really wouldn't take that long. And then we could get to the business of actually enjoying ourselves on this earth. But of course, one of the major problems is the economic system being one of profit over value of life, equal life. So that's a major one, and that might take some time. But I'm willing to dedicate my life to that task. And I know there's other people who are as well. And we're going to need politicians, and we're going to need lawyers who are self-honest and are willing to stand up in the system and help rewrite laws so that human rights are guaranteed and animal rights are guaranteed, and that all life is valued equally, and that the economic system is adjusted appropriately so that people don't have to work for survival. And it's a large problem, but at the same time, you're going to have to work in this world regardless. That's just the way it is. So do you want your labor to actually make a difference, or do you want it to just be basically a sacrifice of yourself and your life force for nothing? Because even those who try to protect their positions of status, who you might call the elite, they don't get to take any of it with them either. They're victims just as much as you are to their own acceptance of a system that they perceive as greater than them, instead of realizing that the system is a projection of who we are, and that if whatever we believe we can achieve. And so if we could conceive of a system that would support all life equally, and we would believe it and just accept that it's possible, we could achieve it. But you see, the problem is, if in our minds we're afraid, and if we're not able to communicate, and if we don't feel like we have a way where we can survive if we become honest, then we're stuck in a problem. And that's why the Techno Tutor, as an opportunity to become involved, not only for yourself to utilize it to become more effective, but also as an opportunity to share it with others as a business. It's why it's such an amazing opportunity, because it allows you to have that freedom financially if you build a business, but also you can utilize the technology to become more effective at understanding and becoming flexible as to what it takes to actually build a business, to become an effective person who can share, but who also understands how to know the score and keep the score and run an effective business. And you can develop communication skills, because all of those things are based on an effective vocabulary. And that's the number one thing that you need to understand. If you look up Johnson O'Connor and the Human Engineering Laboratories, they proved over like 70 years that the only thing that mega successful people in any field, whether they're artists, whether they're writers, whether they're doctors, whether they're CEOs of companies, whether they're teachers, plumbers, whatever, the number one thing that all those people had in common, who are at the top of their fields, is that they have the most effective vocabularies. So no matter what it is you want to do, if you increase your vocabulary, you'll be able to do it more effectively. But if you can increase your vocabulary in a general sense, you just become a generally more effective human being, and you become a more reasonable human being, because you'll start seeing that we're not actually all very different at all. We're actually all the same, and we're all from the same place. We're all made of the same physical substance. We're made of the same earth. My body is made of the exact same stuff that your body is. We're not different. Where we become different is when we inject this sense of individuality, but not a real individuality. It's a mental individuality, which is not real, because you can't take that with you when you die. Yes, you are an individual, because you are an individual body embedded in a reality where you have the ability to direct this body. But how many people actually direct their bodies? How many people actually, if you're self-honest, allow themselves to be directed by their thoughts and their feelings and their emotions, which are not coming from you? They're coming from your vocabulary, which was programmed into you when you were a young child ineffectively. So your conscious thought process, your feelings, everything is just coming up automatically, and you've resigned yourself to becoming an observer of your reality. And that's why spirituality is a trap, because it teaches you that you should just be an observer. That's just like saying if you're seeing a person raping another person, you should just sit back and watch instead of getting involved and stopping it. If you know that your thoughts are limiting you because they're separating you from other human beings, the very act of thinking, the very act of feeling things that direct you against your own common sense, the very act of participating in those things is actually harming you and other people, then you have a responsibility to stop participating in it. And if you're not aware, well, you're not aware. But if you're watching this video, then I'm making you aware. So you might have to consider it a little more, because some people, depending on, what you've been exposed to, you might be like totally shocked by what I'm talking about. But some of you might understand and hear the common sense in what I'm talking about. And for those who are ready to hear what I'm saying, you should definitely connect with me, because there's not really much else you can do with your life that I can see. There's really nothing else you can do with your life at this point that's really going to make any difference whatsoever other than what we're doing. Because what else is going to solve the problem of what you're going to do for work if you stand up in the system? What else is going to solve the problem of how can you actually stand up in the system and support other people to do so? If we know that everyone's just being directed by their thoughts, feelings, and emotions, which are the result of an ineffective vocabulary. Because if that's the case, then the only thing you can do is try to make money by helping everybody solve their problem, which is an ineffective vocabulary. So imagine if you could do that. Imagine if you could solve the problem of everyone having an ineffective vocabulary and solve it by making money. Then you've solved both the problem of education and work. And now you're actually standing up in the system, up to the system. You're standing up to the system with a solution, but in a way where you can actually support yourself. Because if you look at all the examples in history, the people who tried to stand up against the system and fight it, they all fail. It doesn't work. Because if you stand up and you start speaking and being honest, people will fight you. The very ones that you're trying to help will fight you. The solution is, instead of trying to fight people, firstly, do this yourself. Utilize this technology. It will support you to see things and to understand things that you would not have been able to understand or communicate before. But you have to take that responsibility on for yourself. And then as you do that, you can support other people. And you can support the children. Because it really won't take that many people standing up in this world with an effective ability to reason and with common sense, and letting go of their differences of opinion, which are just based on ineffective vocabulary. Because if you have an opinion about something, it means you don't know. If you have a belief about something, it means you don't know. Reality is right here. If you have a belief about something, it's because you don't see reality. Because there's nothing hidden in reality. It's right here. There's nothing that can be hidden. It's all here. If you can't see, it's because you're limited. That's why you have to have a belief. That's why you have formed an opinion, because you realize you don't know. How do you get to know? Just develop an effective vocabulary. And we can show you how to do that. It's actually very simple. It's so simple, it'll blow your mind. But it does require your participation. It does require your effort. It does require your dedication. If you are expecting things to just happen automatically, like I had somebody say, wouldn't it be great if you could just hook your brain up to something and it would just download everything you need to know? Yeah, that would be great, but that doesn't exist. You don't understand how anything works. If that's what you're looking for, you're fucked. You're part of the problem. If you're just trying to find a way to make it easy, you're part of the problem. We can't make it easy, but we can make it simple, and we can make it doable. And we can support each other as a group. Instead of fighting each other and trying to fight for our limitations and justify all that, we can work together as a group. And we can actually make a difference that we would be proud of, and that we know will leave the world a better place for our children. And if we have to come back to this earth, for us. But it starts with making a decision within yourself that enough is enough. I'm not going to live another day just being a slave. I'm not going to live another day just waiting, because 5 years from now, you're going to be the same goddamn person that you are right now if you don't change something. And the thing is, if you're honest with yourself, you realize you don't know what to change and you don't know how to change. That's why you need support. That's why you should talk to me. You should talk to those who are working with me as a group, because we actually have tools, we have solutions that work and that we've proven over time are sustainable, and it creates real change. Not just mental change. Look at the post I did on Facebook a little while ago. Right? Real change happens as a development of a physical capacity to do and be more and to express more. Mental change is when you just change your belief about yourself. You can easily convince yourself of all kinds of bullshit and feel certain ways, but it will eventually end because it's based on energy. It's not based on real physical structure. Real change happens in the physical. And that's why you cannot change yourself through a thought process, because it's energy based and it's just going on up here. It's not changing anything physically inside. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll admit you don't know how to change that physical structure inside. That's why we have TechnoTutor. That's why it's so important and so imperative for you to do something different. Because if you keep doing what you're doing, you're just going to keep getting what you've got, and the world's going to be the same. So send me a private message or leave me a comment if you want to know more. I like Gavin. That reworking of that quote, that's a good one. Right? Because what do they say? Give me a child, or give me control over, what is it? What is the quote? Give me a control over a nation's economy. I don't care who makes the laws. Is that the original one? But I like what you're saying, because that's the real deal. If you develop an effective vocabulary, it doesn't really matter who makes the laws, because if you have an effective vocabulary, you can place yourself as a politician, and then you can rewrite the laws yourself. That's what we're all about, because it's the laws that are making the difference. You can't just complain about politicians. You can't complain about how things are. You actually have to go and do something about it and change it. So it'll take a process, but we can make it as a group. That's why we're here. Yeah. All right. See you next time.